She thought she found love, but what she found was danger disguised in a smile. This is her story, and it's one you'll never forget. Alexandria Ali Castile was born in St. Louis, Missouri on September 11, 1997, and her bubbly and outgoing personality began taking shape almost immediately. Ali always had Elsa friends, and she was close with her parents, Cindy and Keith, and her younger brother, Andrew, as well. She had a relatively happy and uneventful childhood as a teenager. She attended Lindbergh High School, where she cheered, ran track, and played on the golf team. Ali also participated in student government, was a member of the National Honor Society, and was driven to serve those less fortunate than she was. As such, she traveled to Africa and South America to teach English to poor children in rural communities. In high school, Ali and her friend Maddie Norris were so inseparable, they even went to the prom together. Most of Ali's friends went on to in-state colleges and universities after graduation, but she had always dreamed of attending Old Miss in Oxford, Mississippi. Ali loved the school's rich history and its old-fashioned Southern charm. According to her mother, she was also a big fan of the school's top-notch football team, and more importantly, she thought it would be a great place to meet a future husband with an academic record like Ali's. Getting into Old Miss was never really in doubt. Ali graduated from high school in the summer of 2016 and moved to Oxford the following fall. Right off the bat, she loved Old Miss. Her plan was to study business and marketing and work in the fashion industry when she graduated, but she wasn't about to spend the next 4 years living in a library. Ali didn't waste any time making friends and getting involved in on- and off-campus activities. She first met Brandon Ild in the fall of 2016. He was from Fort Worth, Texas, and they were instantly attracted to each other. However, they were also polar opposites in many respects. Ali was a popular go-getter with a positive attitude. She endeared herself to nearly everyone she met. But according to a fellow student who lived in the same dorm as Brandon, he was arrogant, conceited, spoiled, and even misogynistic. He said that Brandon often made offensive comments about women, and that he bragged about being from a rich family, and that his dad could get him off the hook no matter what kind of trouble he got into. It's not clear if Brandon behaved like this around Ali, or whether she was just attracted to bad boys, but they did start dating almost immediately. They regularly attended parties and sorority and fraternity functions together, but according to Ali's friends, they were never technically boyfriend and girlfriend. In fact, Ali's friends didn't even like Brandon. Many a night, they were the ones who comforted her when he did or said something rude or more insensitive, or just disappeared without letting her know where he was going or who he was with. At that point, Ali's romantic life was a mess, but she studied hard, stayed active, and spent as much time with her friends as possible. By 2019, graduation was just a year away. Shortly before the end of the spring semester, her parents drove down from St. Louis to visit. They had such a great time together that Ali asked them to stay for a few more days. She was in good spirits when they said goodbye and pulled out of Oxford. But behind the scenes, the tension between her and Brandon was about to reach epic proportions. On April the 12th of 2019, Ali informed Brandon by text that she might be pregnant. She would have preferred to tell him in person, but by then, they weren't dating. Brandon ignored the text, but 2 days later, on the 14th, Ali sent him a photo of an inconclusive home pregnancy test. Eventually, he replied with a text of his own, but it was not what Ali was expecting. Brendan's message stated that she should terminate the pregnancy, that having a child would ruin his life, and that he wouldn't support the baby if she had it at the end. He said he definitely wasn't going to change his mind to a caring and nurturing person like Ali. Brendan's message must have been crushing, and as the drama unfolded, he did a number of internet searches for things like morning-after pills and local abortion services. Ali stayed in Oxford when most of her friends, classmates, and sorority sisters went home for the summer. It's unclear why she stayed, but she may have wanted to get things worked out with Brandon once and for all. Whatever the case, he drove to Fort Worth for a few days in mid-July. On the way back, he posted a photo of a Glock Model 2240 caliber pistol that his father had bought for him. The caption said, "Finally taking my baby back to Oxford." Brandon arrived back in Oxford about 6:30 p.m. on the evening of Tuesday, July the 16th. Later that evening, He scoured the internet for silencers and suppressors that would fit his Glock. He also did a number of internet searches for things like tactical face masks and hollow-point ammunition, and more surprisingly, he read up on the infamous American serial killer Ted Bundy. Cindy Castillo called Allie to see how she was doing on the evening of Friday, July the 19th of 2019. Allie had just woken up from a nap after a long day on campus, and she told her mother that she was going out that evening. She met some friends at a bar in Oxford Square that night, but Brandon sent her a text around 9 p.m. Surprisingly, he asked if he could come to her apartment, and she agreed. She may have thought that he was finally ready to make amends, so she called an Uber to take her home just after 11:30 p.m. About 20 minutes later, a surveillance camera captured her leaving Oxford Square alone. Less than an hour later, at 12:46 a.m., Brandon's Chevy pickup was captured by another surveillance camera, traveling on West Oxford Loop near Allie's apartment at the retreat. Then, at 1:14 a.m., it was seen traveling in the opposite direction on the same road. According to GPS data, Allie and Brendan's phones were traveling together towards Sardis Lake, north of Oxford. Between 1:14 and about 1:55 a.m., between 2 and 2:15, someone reported hearing multiple gunshots near the lake later that morning. Brendan called a friend and asked if you could crash at his place because, according to him, there was an exterminator at his apartment. Brendan's apartment wasn't the site of bug killing, but he arrived at his friend's house around 10 a.m., before leaving at around 1:30 p.m. He did a search on the internet for Sardis, Mississippi news, long before sunrise on the morning of Saturday, July the 20th of 2019. A Lafayette County deputy was on routine patrol near Sardis Lake. The unpaved roads around the lake were dotted with dilapidated fishing cabins and dark stretches of forest. It looked like it was going to be yet another uneventful morning. That is, until he turned a blind corner and his headlights illuminated something more horrific than he had ever seen. Just a few yards away was the lifeless body of a young woman lying face down on the ground. She appeared to have suffered multiple gunshot wounds to her back. The ground around her was littered with spent shell casings, all of which came from a .40 caliber semi-automatic handgun. The deputy immediately radioed for an ambulance and a crime scene investigator. When the ambulance crew arrived, they found Allie's purse on the side of the road. Lafayette County investigator Jared Bundren arrived a few minutes later. He found Allie's driver's license and her University of Mississippi ID card inside her purse. Investigator Bundren was no rookie, but he had never seen a victim that had been shot so many times. He never found the deceased woman's phone, but by then he had more than enough to make a positive identification. Shortly thereafter, Cindy and Keith Custy experienced every parent's worst nightmare, the dreaded call from the police in the wee hours of the morning. As word spread, Allie's friends, family members, and sorority sisters were shocked and horrified. Her high school friend Maddie Norris took the news particularly hard. Investigators began their hunt for the killer by contacting Allie's friends and acquaintances to see if they could shed any light on the brutal murder. Almost to a person, they mentioned one name: Brendan Thield. Investigators never recovered Allie's phone, but luckily, many of the text messages between her and Brandon had synced to her Apple phone. They eventually got a hold of Brandon on the morning of Sunday, July the 21st, and asked if he would come to the station so they could ask him a few questions. He said he was busy that day but promised to come the following morning at 8:30 a.m. Investigators still weren't sure who had killed Allie, but Brendan was a person of interest from the very beginning. Needless to say, they weren't particularly surprised when he didn't show up at the station, as today. He said he would because he was a potential flight risk. They were able to obtain an arrest warrant under exigent circumstances. This meant they could start tracking his cell phone, and lo and behold, Brendan appeared to be driving north on I-55 towards Memphis, Tennessee. They alerted other law enforcement agencies along the way to be on the lookout for his black Chevy pickup truck with the license plate T3E. Coordinating with other departments on such a pressing matter was no easy task, and they worried that Brandon would eventually refine his cell phone and disappear. Thankfully, officers of the Memphis Police Department's Fugitive Task Force sprang into action. They found and surrounded 22-year-old Brendan at a gas station just off the interstate and arrested him without incident. Inside his pickup, they recovered the .40 caliber semi-automatic Glock handgun. Brendan was extradited to Lafayette County, Mississippi just a few days after Allie's brutal murder, but investigators still had to prove that he had actually killed her. While he was in custody, investigators searched his apartment and found a bizarre letter he had written to his parents shortly before Allie was killed. Brendan never sent the letter, but he wanted his parents to know that he often had terrible thoughts that were intensified by cocaine and alcohol that he regularly consumed. The note also said that he thought the end was near and that he would probably end up in jail or perhaps even dead. It's unclear if Brendan's reference to the end meant he was considering taking his own life. Another theory is that he may have envisioned a deadly shootout with police. Whatever the case, investigators found more circumstantial evidence while combing through his computer, cell phone, and social media accounts. GPS data showed that Brendan and Allie's cell phones were in nearly identical locations both before and after her death. But this didn't prove that Brendan had killed Allie, but it was strong circumstantial evidence because it seemed to indicate that he took her phone from the crime scene and either disposed of it or destroyed it on his way back to Oxford. Investigators also found a number of tasteless tweets and posts while searching through Brendan's social media accounts. One was even made on the same day of Allie's body being discovered. It made a thinly veiled reference to a 1982 hit, "You Dropped a Bomb on Me." To investigators, there was a clear parallel between the song and how he felt when Allie told him that she might be pregnant. Ironically, the medical examiner who performed her autopsy determined that she was never actually pregnant. The authorities were already convinced that Brendan had killed Allie, but the case got even stronger when the ballistic test confirmed that the bullets that had killed Allie had been fired from his Glock pistol. A Mississippi grand jury indicted Brendan Theld on a capital murder charge on August the 20th of 2019. Brendan was charged with capital murder instead of first-degree murder because, according to the indictment, he kidnapped Allie before murdering her. Despite the overwhelming evidence against Brendan, his father released a controversial statement to a Mississippi television station. He said that he knew Brendan was innocent, and he asked the public to reserve judgment and presume that he was innocent until found guilty in a court of law. Allie's friends and family held a memorial in honor of her life and to remember the impact she had on their lives.
Her smile, her light will never be forgotten. Allie Costel's friends, they're making sure of that.
The Ole Miss student from St. Louis was shot to death last weekend. There must have been more than 100 people tonight to honor her. Allie's friends say they appreciate the turnout, but Allie would have appreciated even more. There must have been more than 100 people at the vigil. Allie's friends say they appreciate that turnout because there was nothing she loved more than having her friends together. It was emotional. There were lots of hugs and lots of tears.
I may have been Allie's teacher, but clearly listening to everybody's thoughts tonight, she taught a lot of us as well. And I know our candles are burning, but Allie clearly is a light that's going to shine on in each and every one of you.
She didn't deserve what happened to her. Nobody does, but she didn't especially. And I just want everyone to remember that. I want everyone to focus on how good of a person she was and how much joy she brought into the world and how positive she was, not the situation.
Others took to social media to express the disgust they felt toward Brendan for allegedly committing such a gruesome and senseless murder. Brendan's trial was postponed for nearly 2 years because of the COVID-19 pandemic. Even so, he entered a not guilty plea on the capital murder charge, and his defense attorney initially asked that he be released on a reasonable bond. But before the judge could rule on the request, Brendan's attorney asked that he be kept in custody until a psychiatric evaluation could be performed. This may have been a legal maneuver in anticipation of a not guilty by reason of insanity plea, but Brendan was found to be sane and therefore competent to stand trial. In late 2020, after lengthy negotiations between the prosecution and defense, the charge was changed from capital murder to first-degree murder in the summer of 2021. Brendan promptly pleaded guilty. As part of the New Deal, Brendan would take the stand to lay out every detail of the crime he had committed. The Estill, the Theld, and a dozen of Allie's friends and sorority sisters were present during the trial. The atmosphere in the courtroom was understandably tense and emotional. Neither Brendan nor his attorney ever revealed a motive for the murder. But according to Lafayette County District Attorney Ben Creekmore, he killed Allie because he didn't want a child. This was a particularly heartbreaking moment for friends and family, because by then, everyone knew she had never actually been pregnant. As heartbreaking as the proceedings were, the trial wasn't particularly tense or dramatic because he had already confessed and pled guilty to first-degree murder. As such, he was convicted and given a life sentence at the Mississippi State Penitentiary, or, as it is more commonly known, Parchman Fall. However, there is still a chance that Brendan could get out of prison one day in Mississippi. Anyone convicted of first-degree murder may be released after serving 15 years, or when they become 65 years old. That said, there is no guarantee that he will ever be released, and he may well die in prison. After the verdict was read, Brandon apologized to Cindy and Keith Cold for killing their daughter and for the pain that he caused their family. He also said that he wished he could take it all back. He asked for God's forgiveness, and he hoped they would be able to forgive him as well.